This is Criteria. All right, welcome back, everyone, to Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast. I'm James Majewski here with my co-host Thomas V. Miras. What's up, Thomas?
Hey, James.
And today we've got a treat for you. We are doing a deep cut that I'm sure most of our Catholic audience may have, will have never heard of before. I'm talking about the classic musical adaptation, The Sound of Music, 1965, directed by Robert Weiss. I was being sarcastic.
That was a really great. We were questioning whether it was pronounced Robert Wise or Robert Weiss, and you somehow pronounced it like both ways at once.
Exactly.
It was like
this is a
that
hack.
shows your technical training that you were able to somehow do both at once.
This is a hack that I often use in audiobooks when I'm unsure of a pronunciation. I just kind of skirt the two that I think are most likely.
That was like the most plausible deniability I've ever heard on a pronunciation. We do try to mix it up a little bit on here in terms of the films that we're viewing. Yeah. And this movie has come up a couple of times in discussion. You mentioned that you might wanted to put it on the Vatican film list.
Totally.
Hypothetical new Vatican film list
in
place of The Wizard of Oz.
I'm surprised that it didn't make it on there initially.
I think Wizard of Oz is probably a more important film historically than The Sound of Music.
But certainly this is a more perfect film.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. A movie that kept coming to mind as we were watching it was Lord of the Rings. Just in terms of the convergence of a lot of perfect variables. It takes a lot to make a movie, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of different ways that a movie can go awry. Yeah. And the Sound of Music is just such a perfect package. Perhaps the most perfect thing about it is that we've got Julie Andrews playing this role of so give us a quick synopsis for those who don't know.
Well, I wanted to say also I'm going to Austria for a couple weeks in October, and that is why we were probably going to discuss this eventually, but that's why I asked that we discuss it, because I was going to watch this. I've never seen, this is my first time seeing The Sound of Music, was watching it for this episode, bizarrely. It's based on a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical, and that in turn is based on, I think, the memoir of Maria von Trapp, right? And this was a woman who came to work for this Captain von Trapp as a nanny for the children. I'm sorry. I kept saying nanny, but that's not. She's the governess. That's a much more, a much more elevated role than being a nanny.
It's awesome.
So apologies to governesses for calling you nanny. Well, she ends up sort of falling in love with the children, and then they fall in love and they get married, and then there's stuff with the Nazis. This is set in Austria, just I think in the Salzburg area, just before World War II, and it's got a lot of incredible music, and apparently. There's a lot of people in the Catholic world have already done deep dives on the real life history.
Right, because Maria von Trapp was Catholic.
Right.
And she wrote several books on recipes and liturgical year observances.
Okay, cool.
And it was before you had these online Catholic influencers and homemakers sort of.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I didn't realize that.
The proto version of that. That's cool. My understanding.
Okay, and also obviously the movie is about the Von Trapp family singers as well, and she teaches the children to sing. That's a big part of the plot. In the movie, the manager of temporarily of the Von Trapp family singers is Max. In real life, the manager was a priest. Oh. And he was sort of their chaplain / manager.
Oh, that's cool.
If anything, the role of Catholicism in the real life story is even greater.
Interesting.
But in this movie, the nuns are more in the forefront rather than the clergy, because Maria starts off this movie wanting to be a nun, and she ends up getting sent to to the home of Captain Von Trapp. He's a widower with 7 children.
7, yep.
People have done these deep dives into the real life Catholic history behind the movie, and I'd rather just focus on the movie itself in this discussion because people have already done such a good job of looking into that.
So, you know, the film's based on a true story, and it has all this sort of built-in Catholic interest. But I think that, you know, the reason I wanted it to be on the Vatican film list, and the reason I think it's worth us talking about, is because the film is just a genuinely good movie also.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that the first thing I'd like to observe about it in just sort of a general way is that it's very cinematic. Now, like, this word is, you know, a little bit of an enigma. It can mean different things depending on how it's employed. But I think that when you're watching this film, from the very opening moments, like, what I mean by cinematic is very clear.
Yeah.
Because we get this amazing opening sequence of, like, it's the Alps, just these beautiful mountains that, you know, kind of play a role throughout the film.
Yeah.
But it's like a solid, you know, couple minutes of these opening helicopter shots of these mountains, and you've got these match cuts between the clouds and the snow, and you have this soundscape of the wind and the breeze, and it's silent, and then the birds are coming in, and then there's this music that begins to swell as the helicopter's coming over a ridge, and there's a little person dotting the landscape, and then this person does a spin, and then cut to the spinning Julie Andrews, and she begins singing, and it's just so glorious.
It's a great build up. And I wish I had seen a greater volume of classic Hollywood musicals to be able to compare the cinematic approach of those to this.
Sure.
I mean, there's plenty of really creative, like, visually splendid, you know, Hollywood musicals, but I'm sure some of them feel more close to like a stage set or something like that than others. I think Robert Wise, I'll cut this if this is wrong, but I think Robert Wise also directed West Side Story. He definitely directed Curse of the Cat People, which is a highly cinematic and atmospheric film. That's a very early career
I
film
would be
of
very
his.
down to watch that and talk about it sometime.
Yeah, so that's the sequel to the original Cat People movie. But one thing I noticed in the treatment of the songs is a lot of, especially in the Do Re Mi, a lot of montage, you know, which keeps things kind of lively and something that might otherwise be kind of static.
Totally.
The Do Re Mi song, which I'll mention, you know, I've heard many of the songs before ever seeing this or really knowing the story. In many cases, I didn't even really know that they were from The Sound of Music, but I've just heard people sing them over the years. In the case of Do Re Mi, I've heard people sing just that first, like, couple lines of the song many times. But the kicker is really later in the song when you learn that, I can't remember the exact lines, but, like, when you learn these notes
you can sing most anything.
Yeah. And that's the musical education. It's like when she starts, like, making up new melodies with the notes and the kids are, like, catching on, that's, like, the really exciting part. And I don't think I've seen, like, a real music lesson on that level done in any other musical. But anyway, still, it's a fairly simple, repetitive song. And what they do is they start with a picnic and then all of these different, you know, set pieces within the song, whereas a lot of the great Hollywood musicals are very creative in their staging and their blocking and what they do with the set and walking down a street or utilizing different parts of a room. But it's, in my experience from the great ones that I can remember seeing, it's more kind of like one set that they're using. Whereas this is like a montage. They're on location, you know, they're riding their bikes down a road. They're taking they're riding a cab through Salzburg. Those kinds of things, and it makes it really exciting, and things are going on that match the music with their bicycle choreography.
The bicycle choreography is amazing. There's a lot of good examples of this. Another excellent example is when she's first leaving the convent.
I was like, I have confidence in me, whatever the name of that song is.
Yes, there's a wonderful montage of her sort of making her way through the city and then to the bus and then off the bus, walking up to the home.
And it's funny because that song it's a fine song. having seen the movie twice now, it's one of the ones that I can't like quite remember the melody to even now. But I do remember the visuals of her like walking down this path with her like clunky like guitar case and her carpet bag, and like it lends so much to her like physical performance that she's like swinging these big heavy objects around, you know?
Yes.
And it fits the song perfectly.
Yeah, I was mentioning that the involvement of Julie Andrews in this film is one of the things that feels perhaps most perfect about it. And her performance is just such a powerhouse. And there are so many moments with her that are absolutely iconic. I mean, that Do Re Mi song, when she's there in the mountains, you know, with her guitar and these like lederhosen children around her, and she's teaching them, it's like, icon, you know? But that sequence, I Have Confidence in Me, as she's coming down the street, it's just such a perfect example of her total like composure and control. I wanted to say something about her performance that I think is very remarkable, because she somehow deftly combines this like total virtuosity and excellence with a lot of personality and natural charisma, and even a kind of like recklessness and imprecision that somehow still manages to like land perfectly every time. This happens both in like for her vocally as well as physically. You see this kind of imprecision that isn't, and it's really, really cool, because a lot of times when you hear, I mean, I'm no expert with musicals, but especially nowadays, anytime I hear like, you know, like that Glee crowd, you know, everything sounds too perfect. Like the voices sound too perfect and also too like homogenous. Like I agree. But she is so singular, so personable, and there's something unmistakably her own in these performances, and yet they're also just incredibly virtuosic. You know? And you see that throughout. But that sequence that you're sort of recalling of her coming down, you know, swinging the bags and just sort of pumping herself up and kind of she's stoking her enthusiasm. There's this climax that's happening, and then it all builds to the first moment she sees the house. The music drops off and her breath is taken away and she almost falters. You know, another few things I'll observe about her performance as long as we're here is that she does incredible work like pantomiming. Like throughout there will be these times when she just sort of mimes a response that for anybody else it would be completely unbelievable.
So what would be an example of that?
Like just sort of like putting her hand to her head and just giving like an exasperated like you know, like there's like an exaggerated mimed response to a lot of things. And this is sort of a piece with the film more broadly. It's very visual in its storytelling. But she does this constantly, where she'll kind of mime a response that seems almost like clownish, and yet she somehow sells it as being totally believable. She skirts this she threads this perfect needle between this womanly motherliness and
boisterousness,
this childlikeness, you know. But then you know, on the other side, she's a master of the screen, so that when the camera comes in close and gets the close up of her, you know, gazing into Captain Von Trapp's eyes, you know, it's full and subtle and like heart melting.
Well, that when they dance in that scene and you get that close up, I was just thinking this movie came out in 1965. I wonder like what was the last movie to use like the technique that they used there, which is like the super soft lighting close up. Where like her hair is like sort of like just sort of like melting into the air, and like, you know, her eyes are shining because they're shining the big lights on her and everything. Because it's like it's something they used to do in old movies a lot, where like when in the wide shot the character just like looks crisp and normal, and then suddenly you cut in and they look like totally different because of the lighting.
I wonder if it maybe is just the use of a different camera, a different lens. Or one time I was working on a film set where they took like Vaseline and actually like put it across the lens to like
that's an old trick. So I mean know. You know, it might be also just like a greater preference for realism in more recent films or something, but it was just striking to see that, and I'm used to seeing that in like an old black and white film from the 30s, and to see that done, and it's a beautiful effect despite its artificiality.
Well, another thing I wanted to say about her performance is that she often does excellent object work. So, you know, like you mentioned how she's swinging the suitcase and the guitar case around, but then also later
the curtains.
Yes, the curtains are, and that's all in one take. You know, she just handles it. I mean, it's choreography and it's object work, and she's just nailing it. You know, effortlessly it seems. So I'm a big fan of hers. I'm a big fan of her in this film. And her performance is certainly what helps lend the film its sort of cinematic might. But I think also there are these other things, like the fact that it's so much of it is shot on location, beautiful locations that are leveraged really well. But then also there are a lot of studio sets that are used as well. In particular, I'm thinking about that gazebo where we get a really excellent dance number between the eldest child,
eldest daughter, and
Liesel, and Rolf, sort of the young. It's that I am 16 going on to 17 bit. That's great. That dance, that the two of them together. The lighting is super dark. They're going in and out of darkness. It's kind of perfectly suggestive of this transitional moment where you're still a child, but you're also an adult. Because some shots of them in profile, it's almost like something out of a film noir, you know? But and then the rain, you know, and the lightning.
And later on, that same set is used for you know, a much more mature and sort of like less uncertain, less insecure, you know, version of the same thing between the captain and Maria.
Right. So this is, you know, a director who's really utilizing the tools at his disposal very well, you know, so that he's on this beautiful location, but he's not bound to it. You know, he's also getting into a more controlled environment and then using that to its fullest extent. And then I guess any sort of summary of this film would be incomplete if you didn't also talk about the music and how the music, it's like every single song is a banger.
Right.
You know?
Pretty much. Yeah.
For some reason, a band that came to mind is the Foo Fighters. Because if you're not familiar with the Foo Fighters, you somehow know like a bunch of songs by them because of how popular these songs are and how often they get played on the radio. And the same is true here. You know, it's like every other song, you're like, oh, I've been hearing this forever.
Yeah, maybe with like 2 or 3 exceptions, they're all like super memorable. And it's great. I mean, what about Christopher Plummer though? I mean, he's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know what else. I'm not very knowledgeable about him. I think previously I only saw him as an old man in Terrence Malick's The New World. Yeah. So I don't know what else he was in, but he's very, very, very cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this film it's essentially a Beauty and the Beast archetypal sort of situation,
right?
Where Captain Von Trapp, you know, he's a Navy veteran. He's you know, a stern man. His wife has died several years ago, and so there's a warmth that's left him and left the home. And Julie Andrews, Maria, you know, she very much comes in to kind of upset that and breathe new life into this family. Yeah. It's a beautiful parable, really, about how the woman is the heart of the home and of the family. But that's just Beauty and the Beast for you, you know. So Christopher Plummer captures this like perfect, you know, masculine stillness.
Yeah,
you know, there's this power that he exudes in just sort of being this kind of hard presence that also is able to soften when we finally get him singing.
Yeah, so the first time I watched that movie, I was actually like sobbing when he like comes into the room and like his face like softens as he's watching his children sing. Like that was the part that just like wrecked me, basically.
Yeah, and when he's finally given a solo moment to sing, the song that he's given is this just amazingly beautiful, nostalgic lullaby in Edelweiss, you know? And so... yeah, that's also a very special performance. Someone who's able to do both of these things, you know, and they're integrated, right?
Now that's not his voice singing.
Is it really?
He was dubbed by somebody else.
Oh, cool.
He did sing originally, but they overdubbed it with somebody else.
I see. Well, in any case, his I guess you know what I'm referring to mostly is how he embodies this this character,
for sure.
You know, because in the end, it all feels very integrated. So that it's not like he's got this split personality,
right? Because
his sternness really comes into play in the second half of the film when the Nazis take over Austria, and he, being a patriot, has to kind of put up some resistance, and then eventually flee, and So as the head of the family, he's protecting his children, his wife, and he's doing so with a real, toughness, a real spine that is very much, it's the light side of the dark side of what we saw earlier. It's the flip side of the same coin,
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, one thing we haven't talked about too much is the vocational aspect for Maria and her sort of coming into her own as a woman.
Yes.
Because, again, I mentioned she starts out in the convent. She's kind of an irresponsible nun, sincerely trying to, be a nun, but sort of just unable to contain herself and her high spirits and be sort of out of place, And what ends up happening is that it's striking. She's sent on this mission to help the Von Trapp family, and when she comes back, because she's realized that, she has feelings for the captain has feelings for her, and she doesn't want to get in the way of his intentions with the Baroness that he's trying to woo. She flees back to the convent, and one thing she says to the Mother Superior is that, she was there. I forget the exact line, but she said that she was there to do God's work, and she felt that it would be unfair to ask for something for herself in that. And so I just thought that was very striking that the movie sort of like keeps that thread going throughout. At the beginning, when the Mother Superior convinces her that it's God's will to leave the Abbey, she asked her what she's learned in the Abbey, and Maria says to find out the will of God and to do it wholeheartedly. And so, even though you don't mostly hear her talking about God to the other characters or anything like that, it still remains a core of her motivations throughout, and she's really only able to come to peace with this new vocation of marriage when she is convinced that it's God's will.
Yeah.
There is that one moment when she first goes to dinner with the captain and the children, and they're not saying grace, and she reminds them to. So there's also that subtle element of her like bringing like some religion back into the family life as well. But I just love the coming back with the Mother Superior and that relationship being so core to the film and her character, and very relatable for a lot of I know a number of young women who have been in convents for a certain amount of time and then been told that it's not their vocation and having to have that transition. And the great thing about this relationship is that the Mother Superior doesn't just kick her out. She sort of like shows her the way and is able to sort of encourage her and have her have a purpose outside of the convent.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's a great illustration of vocational discernment and of the freedom and the openness that's really necessary for that to happen. You could see a less sensitive hand sort of rendering this in like a, in a really superficial way, where the Mother Superior is kind of controlling, and the young novice needs to get away and be herself, but actually it's the Mother Superior who encourages her in that song "Climb Every Mountain," to really follow her dreams,
right?
And it's kind of this that I think strikes at what is at like the core theme of the film. There's a lot of themes that you could talk about in this movie. It's 3 hours long. I think that the sound of music is really just a reference to grace, and that from the opening moments of the film, that's suggested by this long sequence in the mountains, where at first you're just hearing silence, So what is it what is the first line? The hills are alive with the sound of music. And we've just heard what that music is. It's the sound of silence, of the wind, of birds. And in that song, we hear Maria sing something like, I wrote it down.
Something about a lark that is learning to pray or something.
Yes,
like that.
And I go to the hills when my heart is lonely. I know I will hear what I've heard before. So it's this gesture toward contemplation, toward contemplative prayer, how nature can be the locus of encounter with God. I mean, the mountain, right, has always been an important place to retreat to in the Old Testament, in the New Testament. Our Lord, going up to the mountain and retreating and encountering God there. And so that's why when I mentioned the mountains kind of playing a role throughout the film, they do. It's there that Maria brings the children. It's also there that the Mother Superior gazes to the mountains and sings of them when she's encouraging Maria to follow her dreams. And then in the end, it's where they escape.
Right.
When
what's the verse from Mother Superior quotes them when they say they're going to go and flee into the hills? She says, my eyes look to the hills. And
yes.
I wish I could remember the exact line.
Right. But yeah, so it does, it's like a central thread, and it very well may be the central thread, that the music in this film represents the inbreaking of grace, and that there's something in the music that is the key to God's will, that there's even a suggestion from the there's a character in the movie who's kind of a cooperator with the Nazis, and he's kind of like the leading Nazi official in the area.
Yeah.
And he even says something about how under Nazi Germany, nothing will have changed, and that there will still be music. And we can hear how his words like ring hollow,
Right.
So I think that the depiction here of vocational discernment, and of its being fundamentally something that is liberating, that is attracting, that's called forth from you, like deep in the heart, and not something that's an imposition or a manipulation or or an escape. I mean, there's the Mother Superior says to her that these walls are not built to keep problems out.
Right.
Right. That they need to be faced. So there's just a remarkably...
Which reminded me of the dialogues of the Carmelites, which I guess you haven't seen yet, but that's a similar theme, and where in that case the character is this is a play by Bernanos and a great opera, which I've covered on the Catholic Culture podcast, and the main character is a young woman who's seeking religious life to escape her fear of the world.
Yeah.
And she ends up getting accepted only to have to face martyrdom in the French Revolution.
Yeah. Well, so the point that I'm driving at is that it's a remarkably nuanced depiction of all of these things.
Yeah.
For what you would expect from a Hollywood film, and the way that the nuns come across ends up being not just sympathetic, but even very noble and attractive in their own right. You could see another film sort of drawing a very negative contrast between the open, beautiful expanse of these mountains, and then the stark, harshness of the cloister. Mm-hmm. And there is a very striking visual contrast that's presented to us at the very beginning of the film when, Maria returns to the convent, and it's just these giant, windowless walls, stone walls. It presents a very different image. And yet we get this suggestion throughout that, yes, these walls aren't designed to keep problems out, that there's actually a mountain that we're ascending here. Right. And when the Mother Superior is singing to her, you really get this impression that she's singing from her own experience, of responding to love. And that's how she's able to encourage and advise Maria and frankly recognize what's going on, right. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting in that song, the Climb Every Mountain song, which, by the way, is my least favorite song in the movie. Too. From a musical perspective. I just find it kind of monotonous. But the way that the Mother Superior is shot is, her face isn't lit up a lot of the time. She's sort of just in the shadows. Much of it you can't even see her face. I wonder why. I wonder why they chose to do it that way. What that's supposed to signify. I mean, is it sort of like the process of, because at the end she's staring out the window with the light on her,
right,
fully illuminating her face.
I see.
I don't know if it's the process of that or just symbolic of the withdrawal into the convent being her mountain, her hiddenness from the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's kind of an interesting way of they blocked that. You're just seeing the light on Maria's face. And
yeah. And, talking about vocational discernment too, I appreciate that, the married state is really shown here as being a holy and noble one, mm-hmm. So the Mother Superior even says, something like, the union of man and woman is holy too.
Yeah.
And we get the reprise of that song, How Do You Solve a Problem Like Maria, right, as she's being married off. Right. And I love the suppressed statement that the way you solve a problem like Maria is you get her married. But that's true, I think, and certainly true. It was true for me that a lot of things are solved when you respond to your vocation. But what else can we say?
What did you make of this? Film? What did you make of the song that she sings when she and the captain finally come together in the gazebo? That's somewhere in my youth or childhood. So the idea is she's saying, "I can't believe this is happening to me."
Mm-hmm.
The idea is the idea of the song is there must have been something in my. There must have been a moment of truth, even in my wretched, miserable childhood. And the chorus is somewhere in my youth or childhood, I must have done something good. So at first I was like, I don't know what that means. Is that naivete? Just searching for an explanation for why something good would happen to me? Is there some deeper truth to that of finding the roots of?
I think that if it's all about attributing this gift to myself, then it's wrong. But I don't think that that's the thrust of the song. Mm-hmm. I think that, especially when she refers to something in her childhood that was true.
Right.
I think that it's this reckoning with the operation of grace over a long period of time.
Yeah. Right. That makes sense.
So yeah, that's the way that I choose to read it. Okay, so the mountain song is your least favorite. Do you have a favorite song?
Gosh, there's so many good ones.
I can tell you mine.
What's that?
My favorite is my favorite thing. These are my favorite things.
Yeah.
I really like that one because it somehow sounds both cheerful and melancholic. It's got this like great quality to it where it feels somehow very sad and optimistic, and I'm not just talking about the lyrics,
right?
But the melody has this kind of this ambivalence that I really like.
Have you ever heard John Coltrane's famous version of that?
No.
Yeah, he had this like massive hit with this like sort of like, really intense performance of My Favorite Things.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like one of the most famous jazz
great.
recordings.
Okay, yeah, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, but it's like very intense.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's hard to pick a favorite. I think one of the most musically, I mean, the title song, one of the most musically interesting ones, but it's really hard to say. I think that one thing that's delightful about a lot of the songs is some of them are pretty repetitive, and yet they manage to stay interesting with different. I forget the person who did the arrangements for the film, but it's consistently very good orchestration and harmonization, and even the instrumental parts. Like after they sing the "So Long Farewell" song when they're leaving the concert and fleeing, and then the Nazis are all trying to find where they are, and you've got this like manic, chaotic sounding version of the song, and all the motifs are kind of worked in. It's just delightful. I particularly like certain moments towards the end of that song in the first performance, the way that as that song is kind of winding down, there's some like really beautiful chord progressions or harmonies that like make it quite touching despite how like simple and repetitive the melody is. I'm thinking especially about when it's sort of like slowing down and the littlest girl is singing her part. It's just very it's very sweet.
That's good.
Yeah. There's a bunch of great songs, but that's like the specific moment that I was like honing in on the most. Is like the way that they arranged that part.
And you talking about that reminded me that one of the things I like about the film is the choreographed moments. So there's some really nice dances. I already mentioned the one in the gazebo, but then later there's like this waltz between the captain and Maria. That's very nice. And then also this awesome puppet show. The puppet show is great. And kids love it. My kids love that puppet show. And I think that there's something about puppets that are super enchanting even on screen, which is kind of amazing. Of course, they're all the more so in person. Puppets are amazing. But I guess, you would point to the success of something like Sesame Street or the Muppets to sort of illustrate that these puppets retain their magic even on screen. And that's certainly the case here. So it's like great fun, good family fun, but also some good meaty themes to chew on as well. And then also just like pure cinema. Like, dude, Christopher Plummer ripping a Nazi flag is just pure cinema. And there's so many great moments like that that you can just really savor, So a few further observations, if I may, particularly around this theme of contemplation. I'm remembering there's a line that Christopher Plummer's that Captain Von Trapp says when he's talking with the Baroness about Vienna and how kind of out of place he is there. He says a line, activity suggests a life filled with purpose. And it's just interesting because that's not really true. and I think the film's kind of the countryside and this beautiful environment that they're inhabiting is as much like a character of this film as anything else. And so its capacity to connect you to God, I think is, it's like, it's a pretty evident part of the movie, and the ridiculousness of the city folk when they arrive on the scene, the Baroness and Max, who we already mentioned, sort of plays into that as well.
Right.
Something I like about the Baroness is that she's not a conventional villain. You know, another movie
that's
could
true.
have made her into like the home wrecker who's going to come in and steal the captain away.
She like has all the affectation of that kind of character.
Yes.
And it's like cringy to whenever she opens her mouth. That's
Right.
like nothing, her tone of voice is almost never real except for at the very end. But she's not really, you know, sadistic. Except the worst moments when she says like there are things called boarding schools to like send the children to.
Yes. But we can understand where it's coming from, and we can also see she's a sympathetic character because she's also a widow, you know, and she's trying to figure out what to do with her life also, and we can see how she recognizes in the end that this isn't that she's not called to this.
Well, even early on, she's perceptive because even early on, when Max, when they first arrive and Max asks, you know, do I hear wedding bells? She says, yes, but I don't know if they're for me or something like that. So even before the governess is on the scene.
Well, it's awesome that Julie Andrews basically plays the same role in Mary Poppins.
Right.
But of course, very different characters, but same sort of general idea. Yeah. Something else I wanted to say about the captain is that one of the things that I think unites him and Maria before they're even aware of it is his piety. So she's pious in the religious sense.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But he's very pious in the patriotic sense, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's not a patriotism that's like, you know, nationalistic and weird in the way that the Nazis are. It's a patriotism that's, you know, tied to this land, right. As like a mother or a father. And so in that sense, there's a real connection between the two of them right away, even before they become aware of it, of their sort of indebtedness to the gift of this country and how it connects them to an inheritance. Yeah, you know,
that's interesting.
I also like where it ends up with the family singing as part of this concert.
Right.
You know, as an aside, I think it's kind of delightful that a film adaptation of a musical somehow gets to like stage a musical right. at the end. Yeah. But what I think is maybe symbolically represented here is the family as the unit of society. Mm-hmm. Because you know, the circumstances for the country are very bleak. It's fraught circumstances for everyone. And Captain Von Trapp, as he's singing, you know, Edelweiss, he begins to falter and fall off.
Yeah.
And it's his wife who steps in to support him.
Yeah, that's great.
And then the family sings. It's the family that consoles him and gives him strength.
Oh, and they get the whole crowd to start singing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then it's the whole crowd, the whole society that benefits from that.
Right.
And so, you know, that just made me, I mean, there's so many awesome things about this movie that can be discussed from the perspective of, you know, marriage and male and female complementarity, and the family. But that's one that I would point to as just sort of being, you know, especially remarkable because we're in this historical and cultural moment where the family is so, you know, degraded.
Right. Is Julie Andrews like an early like manic pixie dream girl in this movie?
I don't think so. I had thought about that. I think the manic pixie dream girl is they're usually much more like broken. Yes,
right?
Yes. But she is a kind of character that we've seen before. Yeah. And someone that came to mind was Greta Gerwig. I don't know if you've seen a lot of films with Greta Gerwig in them.
Not too many. Frances Ha mainly.
Yeah, but like Frances Ha is a perfect example. Yeah. There's something in like the energy of Frances Ha, and I wouldn't describe her as a manic pixie dream girl, you know, that is very reminiscent of Julie Andrews in this film. And it's that I think it's that kind of childlikeness.
Yeah.
That there's something very disarming and very charming, very innocent. And yet womanly.
Cool.
I had thought about that.
So this film was not well received in Austria.
Oh, really?
Because there's like did not use any of the real Austrian folk songs that the Von Trapps were actually singing. And Rodgers and Hammerstein had considered that, but they realized it wouldn't. They were considering doing both their original stuff with Austrian folk songs, but they just realized it wouldn't fit together well. So they went with like an all original. Even Edelweiss is supposed to be, it's sort of implied to be this folk song, but it's not real. But apparently there's a couple of like Austrian or German movies that are considered to be like the authoritative account of like how it really was. But I mean, this is a very dramatic, like compressed version. Like, he's forbidding his children to sing. In reality, he was like much more of like a warm, open father. And he lost a family fortune or something like that. And so had to start the singing group to keep them afloat. And I think in reality also, like, they got married like a few years before they had to leave the country. I think they already had like 2 or 3 kids when they had to flee to ultimately ended up in Vermont, Stowe, Vermont. Actually, there's like a Von Trapp family lodge there.
Yeah, well, it does end up feeling, in my opinion, like a very American film.
And when they escaped, they didn't escape over the mountains. I think they literally just like took a train through Europe and eventually made their way to America.
and I'm not just talking about it's being this like Broadway musical, but at the end when Captain Von Trapp has this kind of like showdown with Rolf. Rolf is in his Nazi regalia, holding a pistol at him, and Captain Von Trapp just sort of, very calmly exuding all this masculine strength and confidence, approaches him and then disarms him. Right. To me, this is like a snapshot of, the Allies, America, facing down this immature Nazi Germany, right? That and
also kind of like a Western-y kind of
totally.
scene,
So it feels like it's imbued with a little bit of that mythology too. I don't say that in a negative way. I really enjoy that. But that was definitely something that I was kind of thinking about as I was watching this. I guess one last thing I'll say, 2 last things I'll say. It's so great to see a good man, in a film. Mm-hmm. This is, I think, one of the key sources of enjoyment for me in watching this film is seeing this strong father, who's also soft and loving.
And like also like very witty and charming and cool. Yeah.
Yeah. And patriotic and all this stuff. But no, the second and last observation I'll make is about these shots of the mountains that we get in the beginning of the film and then again at the end as they're making their escape. These are shots that are done ostensibly from a helicopter. And I want to just point out how much better these are and how preferable they are to drone shots.
Oh, okay.
I don't know, man. Maybe I'm some sort of Luddite, but anytime I see a drone shot in a film, I'm like immediately taken out. There's something so robotic, so sort of stilted about these drone shots that are just, they're super prevalent. They're in everything.
Helicopter shots can feel very like kinetic.
And that's exactly what because they're alive. There's this movement. In the opening and the closing of Sound of Music are perfect examples of this. And I would, recommend anybody next time you watch The Sound of Music, pay attention to this. But as the camera's moving through the mountains, it's not staying perfectly still.
Yeah.
It's like a bird in flight. And you really get this exhilarating sense as you're seeing everything. because it's got this kinetic energy and this imperfection where things begin to tilt and move and shake a little bit.
It's probably a combination of just like the way that they fly and also the fact that there's like a person inside of it piloting and like making micro adjustments.
Yeah. Well, and holding
versus
the
remote
camera.
Control or robotic.
Yeah, but and there's a cameraman holding a camera.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's
right?
true too. Yeah.
But the last shot when you see the 7 children and the 2 parents, you know, leaving over the mountain, I could not not think about Lord of the Rings, you know. But you know, you wonder if Peter Jackson isn't actually thinking about this shot.
Maybe, the way that the shot is framed with them sort of coming over the ridge is very similar.
But it also made me think about you know, how like the Lord of the Rings that movie was perfectly timed for so many reasons, but one of them being that, you know, there's not a drone shot in there.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. And so anybody who wants to check out more stuff from Catholic Culture, go to catholicculture.org/newsletter and sign up to hear about everything we've got going on, all of our new articles and podcasts and various other things. All right, everybody. See you next time.
Criteria is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and the Catholic Culture Podcast, an interview show exploring Catholic arts, culture, and issues. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.